So they always had to figure out. So we were supposed to it's not. I have to be anyway, we're gonna play for 3 hours on Wednesday. I'm successful.
Good evening and welcome to the April meeting of the Granville Schools Board of Education. If you would please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Carroll, call roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
Ms. Deeds? Here. Ms. Shaw? Here. Ms. O'Day? Here.
Wonderful. We've got an agenda here, and I believe there's one addendum to it. So we have a motion to approve the amended agenda.
Motion. Second.
Roll.
Ms. O'Day? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. First thing on the agenda is my favorite part, which is commendations. Mr. Brown, please.
I told Mr. Hinton, the new high school principal candidate, that you were all here for him. But I lied. So, this is our commendation. We have 2 groups that we want to recognize. The first tonight is to recognize 3 Granville High School students who did not only qualify for National Merit semifinalist status in the fall, but they were named National Merit finalists this spring. The National Merit Scholarship Corporation announced 16,000 semifinalists in the 67th Annual National Merit Scholarship Program this fall. These academically talented high school seniors, once named semifinalists, have the opportunity to be considered for Merit Scholarship Award. To do this, semifinalists must fulfill several requirements to advance to the finalist level of the competition. About 95% of the semifinalists are expected to attain finalist standing, and approximately half of the finalists will win National Merit Scholarship, earning a National Merit Scholarship title. National Merit or Merit Scholarship designees are selected on the basis of their skills, accomplishments, and potential for success in rigorous college studies, without regard to gender, race, ethnic origin, or religious preference. The winners of the 2022 will be announced in April and concluding in July. This is an outstanding accomplishment, and we are so very proud of our semifinalists and our 3 finalists. They are Sophia Rose Minton-Fry, Kyle Neely, and Colvin Timmons. Mr. Bernath, do you have your phone ready? Excellent. I can tell you I am not the smartest one in this row.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
One more, please. Thank you.
And parents, we'll give you a window to take some pictures.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Congratulations. Next, we'd like to recognize the Granville High School competition cheerleading team for their amazing success this season. Bouncing back tenfold from seasons restricted by COVID, the seniors of this team, Grace Gottschalk, Delaney Pruden, Bella Cox, Liv Pyatt, and Shalene Day, have led the team to multiple victories this season. Competition cheerleading received first place and grand champion status in the December competition at Heath, securing their paid bid to the AmeriCheer International competition. They continue to win against numerous teams across the country at competitions, proving how powerful and united the team was and has grown to be. Their continued success at regionals and again at states, where they placed third in their extremely competitive division. Then they turned their focus to the internationals. After many months of hard work, they won the program's first national title and took first place and grand champions at the internationals, competing against numerous teams from the United States and other countries. Congratulations to all the girls on the team and Coach Siebold. So I am going to call them up now, but I have to say, if you've never been to the Commons during their practices, what they can do is not human. Their bodies can contort and flip, and it is a tremendous amount of work and dedication. And I'm impressed every time I see them in the gymnasium or the Commons with the amount of dedication that they have to their sport. So congratulations to these girls. Bella Cox, Shalene Day, Grace Gottschalk, Delaney Pruden, Liv Pyatt, Sejal Sutliff, Ella Kunar, Ellie Hobart, Riley Lynn, Ella Persani, thank you. Alana Kale, Bella Jump, and Rhea Morris, and Coach Siegel.
Do you want 2 rows?
No, you just.
I was going to say, they're professionals at this. I'm the amateur. So, all right, girls, getting there you go.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to take one more. Thank you.
Okay, wait for parents. All right, excellent. Congratulations. I usually say this and then people run to the door, but that does conclude our accommodations, and we are going to jump into our regular business, so if you want to run now.
Okay.
What's that? Totally fine.
Brittany, I cleared the room for you.
Yeah, thank you. As always. It's time for a very exciting financial report. Okay, first looking at our cash balance, we are at the high point that we are expected to be for this fiscal year. That's just kind of how things always trend with the way the timing works of our property tax settlement. So we are $5.7 million above what we were last March. And again, that is the phase-in into income tax and then the carryover cash that we had at the end of last year. Looking at revenue for the month of March compared to last March, local tax revenue is up. We received our property tax payment in March. but the timing of that always varies based on how much we receive in advance payments versus the actual settlement, so that varies from month to month, year to year. Looking at year-to-date revenue, local tax revenue is up 1.5 million, and that is the increase in the income tax revenue that we're seeing. I'll share more on that on the next slide. State revenue is also up, and that is, again, the new funding formula and the inclusion of the wellness and success funds now in the general fund. So this month we received information from the Ohio Department of Taxation on total taxable income within the district. So we now have 2020 data, which is up 18% over 2019. So that is huge, and as you can see, it's not exactly in alignment with where we've seen increases and or decreases historically. So that's a pretty significant jump. It's also significant to point out from a forecast perspective. So if you think about forecasting 5 years into the future from where we are today in 2022, but in 2022, the only data we have is 2020. So we're already 2 years behind, and then we're trying to forecast out 5 years. So just wanted to present this data. I thought it was interesting. It will certainly be useful for a forecast, but it is always challenging with that bit of a delay. Yeah.
So do you think this is incomes of families that have been in the district, or this is new families coming in with higher incomes? Do you think the incomes have grown, or do you think it's new families with higher incomes?
It's probably a combination of both. So we know that house prices are up, and so logic would say incomes of those families moving in are higher than those leaving due to those prices being higher. So I definitely think that's part of it, but that certainly can't be 18%. So it's then also the incomes of those families that are still here.
Okay, and this is data from like end of 2020, kind of mid
The
beginning
whole-
pandemic, or?
The whole year. So not only did this community not see a decrease due to COVID,
Right, right.
we saw an increase.
And do you think that will remain this, I guess this is part of forecasting, so maybe this
Yeah.
comes later, but we're not sure whether that is something that remained over 2021 and then into 2022, we're not sure.
Yeah, no, it's unlikely that, 2021 would have been another 18% jump.
Right.
But could it have jumped another 3% in 2021? Certainly.
Okay.
So that's what we'll, have to wait and see.
Okay, and I'm sorry, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
think
no.
you're gonna get into this, I'm jumping over to state funding related to this. Is that something you're gonna touch on really?
Well, it does play into that. So the higher our income, the less state funding that we will get.
Okay.
So
That's kind of where it's going.
there's a delay in the data, of course, that the state formula uses because they don't have the 2020 data yet either for this current year that they're funding us. So when that 18% jump gets factored into the formula, that certainly will have an impact on state funding. However, we are in the guarantee, and so we won't actually see a decrease because we are guaranteed to receive the same amount of funding.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah,
But that could change.
that's a good question. Anyway, it could always change. Yeah, every 2 years it could change.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
but that's a good connection. Yep.
Thanks for getting this information. This is great. I don't even recall seeing this kind of chart with this clarity when we voted in the school district income tax a few years ago and so forth, right? But I do recall a lot of conversations about how lumpy an income tax is, right? A property tax is a relatively known quantity, right? Almost exactly, because even with inflation, the school district revenue does not go up typically, for the most part. But this, you can see there's a lot of dynamics, right? And my guess is it's because of our all-income tax that we've chosen for the school district, that's driving a lot of this, right? So people didn't necessarily get 18% raises, but it just so happened that the stock market did well, or there were businesses that were sold, or there were other kinds of one-time events or market-driven type of things that kind of forced this fluctuation. And I remember when we were talking about the income tax, we talked about like, this is just a part of this. This is an inherent part of this. And I'm trying to remember what data we had, but my guess it was something like 2016 data that we had when we put the put it on the ballot. And like, here we are from, 2016 until 2020, which is the only latest data we have. There's a big difference,
Right.
right?
Yep, and what you're exactly right. So when we're putting the levy on the ballot, they would have had 2016 data projecting out to 2019. So that baseline was already probably wrong,
Right.
higher.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and the reason, just to answer, or to address your point of having this data, the reason we have this data is because we are traditional base, and so this is taxed on the same base number as the Ohio state tax. So when we were looking at an earned tax, there would have been no data like this to look at, because that data is not reported anywhere else unless you have a school district tax that's on an earned base. But because we're traditional, we can look at it at this level. Does that make sense?
And again, from a forecasting perspective, if you had asked me like 2 years ago today at the April board meeting in 2020, like, oh, the whole world has just crashed, right? We're shutting down the schools and like the economy, who knows what's happening, all the businesses are closing. You'd ask me then, like, would you forecast an 18% income of our residents? Like, nope, right? And ask me today what the forecast is going to be for this year, much less the next 5 years and so forth, and it's tricky. But we do know it's going to have these kinds of fluctuations, right? But that doesn't make it not a very valuable part of our revenue stream, and a really important one for us to keep our eye on and kind of see, what's the average trend here, right? And of course, it'll go up with inflation, right? Which is a healthy part of our revenue stream that might be tied to income taxes. It does naturally adjust, as opposed to our property taxes that don't adjust with inflation. So
Right.
that's
Yes, and
very
that's the benefit, and that's kind of why we wanted to have the income tax,
Yeah.
was to capture that inflation, to take the risk in those down years, but also to capture those significant increases. So that's exactly what we're doing.
And in reality, it'll always be a small portion of our taxes, right? It's 20 to 25% of the revenue that we generate locally. If it were more than that, we would be more at risk of these fluctuations, right? But I think it's a healthy balance,
Right.
in that way, and we just have to kind of make sure we work our way through here and understand, the implications on cash flow, the implications on our other revenue streams.
But while it's 15 to 20% of our revenue without it, so without the renewal in the fall,
Yeah,
we would have a big problem.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
it's our second to third largest revenue source, but that's
Right.
significant.
Yeah.
So it's very important still that we focus on that renewal in November. Anything else on this slide?
That's great.
Okay. All right, then moving on to expenditures for the month of March. All but slight increases in all categories, but not out of alignment with the forecast necessarily. The only items I'll mention is under all of their expenses, we are seeing, some of the typical costs that we're all feeling. So fuel costs being up, parts and supplies for bus repairs being up. So we are starting to see some of those inflation and procurement issues as well. Year to date, after adjusting for insurance and tuition payments, expenditures are up 1.4 million. That is still in alignment with the forecast. We may see some adjustments, like you said, in purchase service, with utilities going up as well, and fuel, so we'll adjust for that during the May forecast revision, but it shouldn't be significant.
Does that take into account ESSER funds?
No. No. So ESSER funds are all separate, and I have those here. So we are primarily trying to spend down the ESSER 2 funds. So there's a lot of overlap in how you can spend each of these various funding sources, but they have different useful lives at this point. So we're trying to use the ESSER 2 first, spend that down on the intervention positions that we have this year and next year. And then what we should also be receiving an invoice here soon from the ESC that we'll be able to utilize those preschool funds for and get that paid off as well. And then our cash reconciliation, and that is it. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question about,
Yeah.
what is the preschool fund?
So preschool, this is special education, COVID dollars. So we are utilizing, so our preschool is contracted through the ESC, so they provide those services. So this is basically to offset those expenses, and it was federal funds.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As you're switching presentations, I'm going to invite Mr. Travis Morris up to the podium to talk a little bit about the Ohio Dyslexia support legislation that was passed, let's see, last year, 2021. So, Mr. Morris, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, good
For your
evening.
presentation.
Unfortunately, I have to follow that thrilling presentation about our financial status. Thanks for putting me second. I really appreciate that. As Mr. Brown shared, I'm here to talk to you about the dyslexia legislation. You might be wondering why the elementary principal is doing that. Well, it's because this legislation most directly affects the elementary students. Because we do provide that early learning, that early process of learning how to read, which is also where we provide that early intervention and early detection of students who might be at risk for dyslexia. As Mr. Brown said, it was passed in 2020. It was passed in 2020 and signed into law in 2021. So from tonight, what I want you to take away are two big facets. One is we still have a lot of unknowns, regardless of the due dates the legislation has in place and the timelines. We as a district and all the other districts in the state of Ohio have a lot of unknowns in terms of what is usable, what is not, what's the direction for this, that sort of thing. We're still moving forward as best we can. We're not just kind of sitting idle and waiting and that sort of thing. So we're still moving forward, but there are some things we just don't know yet. The second thing I want you to take away is, even though there are a lot of unknowns, based on what we do know, Granville Schools is in a very good place. And that's because of the work of our teachers and administrators in the last several years, being responsive to the needs of our students, the needs of our families, and being able to put some of these things in place already before this even took traction, which is I think, just a great shout out to all of our teachers who have come to us as administrators and said this is what we need, families who have come to us and said, can we look at this, as well as Mr. Brown, his leadership and leadership of the board as well. Before we jump into the granular pieces of the law, let's just share with you, this is kind of a general summary of it. There are three basic components to the law. The first is that there are screening measures, so think of assessments that we have to give students in order to identify characteristics or markers of dyslexia. The second piece is professional development for staff. This does affect K-12, but primarily we're looking at K-3, 4, 6, and then 7, 12. Professional development in terms of instructing students who might be identified as having characteristics of dyslexia. And the last piece that really affects us directly is a certification process for staff to be able to receive certification in order to provide what's called a multi-sensory instruction, which is beneficial obviously for students with dyslexia, but also beneficial for all students. Before we jump into this, there are a couple items I want to have some shared understanding on, just as we move forward, because sometimes I think we have these stereotypes of what things mean. I want to make sure that we're not living off of those stereotypes. The first is, what is dyslexia? It is much more than just the reversals of letters and numbers we have probably seen, and we again have that stereotype. Really, when we're looking at dyslexia, we're looking at difficulties when it comes to reading fluently, also just the actual access to decoding and comprehension, is also spelling. And a big part of that comes from a difficulty of what we call the phonological component of language. When you think about the development a child goes through in language, there is that word reading that we so associate with elementary school and teaching children. There's also that listening comprehension and the meaning making that we have when we are listening to the spoken word and that sort of thing, which is why it's always so important to be reading to kids at such a young age to develop that listening component. So dyslexia is all about the sound relationship, the sound and meaning relationship. What does that letter on the page sound like? What does that mean? When I put those letters together, what does that mean when I put those words into letters? When I put those letters into words, the words into sentences, it's all kind of that tiered approach. So dyslexia is, and it's also then the, not only the decoding, but the encoding. So it's not just the reading, it's also the writing component. And so the legislation does address all of that, as well as the interventions that we have in place. So I just want to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, I should understanding for dyslexia. I also want to kind of identify, you're going to hear me say a lot, tier 1, tier 2, tiers of instruction, tiers of assessment. This is what we mean by tiers of instruction. You're looking at groups of students and what are they receiving. So tier 1, you're talking about all students, whether it's all students in a class, or all students in a grade, or all students in the building. It's that general instruction provides all students. Think about like the old adage of the professor at the front of the room sharing the same thing with everybody. Tier 2, you're kind of narrowing that focus a little bit. This is just some students might need some additional support, some reteaching, maybe teaching in a little bit different way, a small group, that sort of thing. And then when we talk about Tier 3, that's much more intensive instruction, might be slowing down quite a bit, might be reteaching some more foundational skills versus just kind of reinforcing the lesson. So when you hear the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, it's all students, some students, and few students. Does that make sense? All right, awesome. All right, so let's jump into those 3 components of the requirements. So the first are dyslexia screeners. And what's most important to know here is that there is no one single test that tells us a child or an adult has dyslexia. There just isn't. So what we have to look for are those markers or those characteristics of dyslexia. And so if you remember way back to when our instructional coaches were here a few months ago and did their presentation what K6 dyslexia looks like, think back to that presentation where each of you had a different ailment and they tried to give you the same exact remedy. It just wasn't going to work for broken arms and all those sorts of things. So the dyslexia screeners allow us to identify students who might have specific characteristics that allows us to then diagnose those remedies for the different students. Again, these are things we do already, which is exciting to say that, yep, we do all these things already, so it's not a big deal. You can see there on the table at the bottom kind of how the rollout of this is going to go. Next school year, all students, kindergarten through 3rd grade, will participate in the screener. The following year and thereafter will only be kindergarten students and students new to the district, obviously because all the other, by then the 1st through 3rd graders will already take it. I'll talk a little bit about what that means, the progress monitor, and then what Tier 2 looks like. Next year, any parent or teacher in grades 4 through 6 may request their child participate in the screener, and then the following years, obviously, it's grades 1 through 6.
Can I ask a question on that?
Absolutely.
Why are you doing the middle grades first?
What do you mean?
So parent-teacher requests for grades 4.
Because next year, kindergarten through 3rd grade, all the students in
Oh,
kindergarten
got it,
through
yes,
3rd
sorry,
grade-
sorry,
Yeah,
yep.
sorry.
Okay.
So the request
Yep,
only
that
happens
makes
for those
sense.
who don't. Okay.
Got it, yep, okay.
So this kind of breaks it down a little bit what that process looks like. So Tier 1, next year, all students kindergarten through 3rd grade will be taking the dyslexia screener assessment. Those results are going to be shared with parents. What's nice to share is that the assessment we are assuming will be approved is the assessment we already have in place and results we already share with parents. So very little is going to be new in that process for us. The next step is we might have students who fall either below benchmark or well below benchmark. We'll identify those students based on that screener is at risk, and we'll provide interventions. Some of that unknown is, we have an idea that we provide interventions 4 to 6 weeks, and then maybe another 4 to 6 weeks, we adjust and so forth. The guidelines from the dyslexia committee might adjust those a little bit, make them a little shorter or a little longer. But we're going to do what's best practice for our kiddos for sure. Progress monitoring essentially means we provide interventions. Think again to that Tier 2, that some students receiving some targeted instruction. And throughout that period of time, we're doing some assessments along the way. Really quick, short assessments to identify, are they making progress, or are we kind of filling in those gaps? Assuming they are, we continue sharing those results, celebrate with families, and continue as we need to. If they are not, if we're seeing those students just aren't quite making that progress we want to see, then we do what's called the Tier 2 screener, which is a little bit more diagnostic in nature, digs a little bit deeper into some of those phonological processing skills, and identifies some of those needs. If we're giving the Tier 2 screener, regardless of how those results come out, we're going to provide an instructional plan no matter what. Either it's great, we don't really see any risk factors, but because we have more data, let's go ahead and provide this level of instruction. Or it's going to be, we do see some risk factors, so let's adjust our interventions and create this plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, will
Yes.
these screenings be during class time, like everybody together, or how, can you tell me how that?
Yeah, actually, jump on the next slide.
Okay,
And,
sorry.
yes, I'll touch on that in just a second. So I want to kind of catch it all together.
Okay.
So when we have to give a Tier 2 screenings, it's just statistically we're going to be giving some Tier 2 screenings to students. The requirement is the results are shared with families within 30 days, which again, it's a practice we already implemented at the elementary school and across the district, so nothing new there. The new piece to this will be if we identify markers or we identify there might be some risk for some phonological processing, we have to provide some additional information to parents we don't typically do. But nothing that is alarming, such as what does reading development look like for students over the course of time, what are those risk factors, what are some evidence-based interventions, and then what is our district's, I don't want to say program, but our process for multisensory literacy instruction. So all these things are nothing that we can't articulate, it's just now we've got to collate those into a document that makes sense for parents and it's easy to use and that sort of thing. So what does all this mean when we reflect on this for Granville schools? So the assessment that we are assuming, one of the assessments we're assuming will be a Tier 1 screener is called the Dibbles assessments. We do that assessment already K through 2. It is given one-on-one. So it's not a whole class, it's given one-on-one. We don't typically do it at third grade unless we identify students who are at risk through other assessments, then we would do that third grade assessment. However, next year, all of our third grade students will participate in that assessment. And even in third grade, it's still given one-on-one.
When you say one-on-one, you're not talking about pull out, you're talking about in the classroom, all the other students are, at
Absolutely.
stations are doing.
Yeah, so some models we've had before is we might have, a different teacher in the room. Maybe our instructional coach is in the classroom teaching, doing some sort of instructional coaching type lessons. The classroom teacher might be having the student off to the side of the room or just right outside the door doing that really quick 1-2 minute assessments. But our goal is that the classroom teachers are giving those assessments, not substitutes or volunteers, just because it's so important for the teacher to hear and be a part of that process. But definitely the classroom teacher. They happen very often during instruction when students are doing some other activities, some independent reading, things like that, and the teachers. Yeah. So we're just got to be creative with that. So again, assuming that we're using DIBELS, then it's not really a big shift for us. If DIBELS is not approved, then we are looking at what are we going to do with K-3. One addition that we are making next year is a resource called Heggerty. Heggerty's been around for a while, so it's not a new resource, it's just new to us. And it is a phonemic awareness-based resource, so it's all very oral and multisensory. The nice thing is it's Tier 1 K, kindergarten and first grade, so all students receive Heggerty, but it is very, very brief and short. So you will even see kindergarten classes right now in line, taking their turns going to the bathroom, and the teacher's doing some Heggerty lessons with them, because it's really quick and it's easy to do it that way. In second grade, and then again in third grade, it's a little bit more of that Tier 2, where we target some kids with that intervention. We've been piloting in 6 classrooms this year. We've had some great success, both from the feedback from the teacher as well as the data on specific students, where we would have been a little more concerned with them. This is kind of hitting some of those markers that we've identified with some work in. So we'll be utilizing that with all of our classes next year. And again, a little bit ahead of the curve. It's not because of the law we did it, it's because we saw a need there and we jumped forward. And it aligns very, very well with our existing phonics resource, which is Foundations. We are assuming the comprehensive test of phonological processing will be an approved screener for Tier 2, which again, those students who aren't quite making progress. Assuming that's the case, we already have staff in our building who are already trained on the CTOP, because we actually started doing this process pre-COVID. We were identifying students on DIBELS and then doing Tier 2 screeners with them. And COVID hit, we had to kind of take a pause because we didn't know what else to do. So assuming it's CTOP, we'll be fine. If it's not CTOP, then obviously there'll be some trainings will have to happen. Even if it is CTOP, we already identified 3 or 4 other staff members who we want to have trained, and then we'll let others volunteer to do so as well. And then the documentation after the Tier 2 screeners, as I said, kind of collating all that, make it easy to use. So it looks like a lot on the paper, but really that is not a lot of shifting that needs to happen for the elementary school. It's just things that we can easily put in place. So the second part of the law for us is professional development. By the beginning of 23-24, so not this coming school year, the following school year, all kindergarten through first grade teachers have to receive 18 hours of dyslexia-based professional development. And you can see kind of that timeline that we have there. So that 18 hours can be through approved vendors. No, we have no idea who those approved vendors are going to be. Or it could be through modules or courses created by ODE, which we have not seen yet. Those are supposed to be available to us the fall of this year. So our plan moving forward is that we're going to target our professional development kit for all kindergarten through third grade. So even though it's K1 in 1 year and then 2-3 the next year, since we're all in one building, we're going to do all of our staff next year, and we're going to build that into our existing schedule. So we're not going to be asking teachers to work on Saturdays and things like that or do it on their own. We're going to build it to staff meetings, grade level conversations, that sort of thing. Most likely utilizing those Ohio Department of Education modules and just adjusting as we see fit. The law does allow for some staff who have received previous training to kind of be excluded from this. Again, we don't know what those previous trainings are. We have several teachers who have participated in the IMSE, the Institute of Multisensory Education. Most of our kindergarten staff, quite a few of our intervention specialists, and other teachers. So they might be excluded from this. If that's the case, then they'll be a part of that team that's kind of fine-tuning what our multisensory literacy instruction looks like. I don't want to say we're retuning everything or even refining, it's just finding those little areas that we definitely need to adjust. Because every year we're constantly looking at what we do differently now, and it's that continuous improvement mindset. So the final piece is the certification process, and this is straight from the law, just requiring that every school establish a process so that teachers can receive that certification for multisensory structured literacy instruction. The nice thing is that it's a district decision. It is not the state mandating what you're going to be using. We don't know necessarily what that pathway looks like. We believe that process like IMSE or Orton Billingham, if you've heard those before, will be part of that certification process because they are pretty influential when it comes to instruction with dyslexia. Fortunately for us, at this point, we have 2 current staff members who meet that Orton Billingham certification, and we have 2 other staff members who are going through that process currently as well. And others have actually expressed interest. So right now for us, this is kind of that next step for us, is kind of looking at what are those pathways, who are the people we have that have that training, or at least have started some of that training, and how can we get them certified. And we're not sure if there are going to be ratios involved in terms of for every certain number of kids, you have to have this many people certified, or if it's just having teachers certified, we need to have a train-the-trainer type model. So again, a little bit of unknowns, but we are in a good place having staff members already kind of meeting these expectations. So I'd like to hear from Fire Hose. Any questions?
So can you speak a little bit to the intensity of the certification process for the Orton Billingham or the?
IMSE.
Yes.
Yeah, there are several other options. I participated in IMSE training. Our director, our student services director, participated as well. It was 5 very intense days, very phonological based, when I say multi-sensory, we're talking tactile, auditory, visual, all those sort of things. That's pretty intense. Orton Gillingham certification is much more intense. There's a practicum involved, there's videotaping of lessons, that sort of thing. So it just kind of depends on which direction we as a district want to go and what our teachers want to go, that sort of thing.
Right. But when people say we need more Orton Gillingham trained teachers, that's absolutely true, I think, around the globe.
Sure.
But it is a long process.
Yes, it is about a 2-year process to get to the highest level certification, and there's even more levels beyond that. But it is very, very intense. And if you're trying to teach a full load, if you're a 3rd grade teacher trying to teach and also trying to get that training, it can be a pretty daunting task.
And is it something that the district would pay for through this new law? Is it something that the district needs to pay for?
I do not believe any funding comes with this law.
Right, of course
It's
not.
a trend that we're used to at this point.
called an unfunded mandate.
Yes.
Yep.
So yes, the answer is yes.
It would be the district.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Got it.
But Cecile,
Yes.
to that point, there is not enough OG instruction available to meet the needs of this law and mandate. So there's
okay.
recognition that there aren't enough trainers in the state of Ohio to actually satisfy what the requirement is. So that's why the Department of Education is kind of scrambling a little bit to try and figure out how can they meet the letter of the law when there aren't enough people actually certified in this process because of the intensity.
Yeah, and we have our 2 teachers who are currently going through the training are part of a cohort with a few other districts that just kind of all said like, hey, let's just come together and make this happen. We also have another teacher who's doing it on our own as well. And so we have that multitude of teachers in place, which again, we're in a much better place than maybe some other districts are. We already have that resource available to us.
Yeah.
And you said we already have 2 staff members who are already gone through the training?
Yes, at varying levels, I believe, but yes, they are certified through Orton Gillingham.
Okay. Can you tell me their names, please? I'm just curious.
Don Cosman and Nancy Nesbitt. And we have several teachers who've gone through the IMSE training, which is a little bit less intense, a little bit more conducive to what I would say being a full-time teacher and trying to do this training. But yeah, we don't know if they'll be an approved vendor for that certification process. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Early on in your presentation, you talked about, I think it was the Ohio Dyslexic Commission or Committee.
Yes, Ohio Dyslexia Committee.
Who's on that committee? What's their role? I'm just.
I'll take that one.
Thank you. I don't think you want my answer.
Yeah, so you won't want my answer either. So the good news is Trevor Thomas, who is the superintendent, was selected to be the superintendent representative on that committee. There were a few teachers, but the committee's majority membership was from the International Dyslexia Association and their lobbyists. So the majority of the membership of that committee was not necessarily teachers in the field. It was people who were a part of getting this legislation in place. Yeah.
Who appointed them? Are they?
That's a great question. So I'm sure it was done through ODE, but the membership came from the majority of the people assigned to the international, from the international
Right, but
dyslexia.
is this a gubernatorial appointment or?
I think it was an ODE through the governor's office.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
If that would,
Mhm.
that's a
What-
fair statement.
And it
And yes, I
had,
did all.
yeah, and it had very specific types of individuals we needed to have on as well. So it's an 11 committee member.
The other thing that I'd like to say is Travis mentioned several times that we are in a stronger position than a lot of school districts in the state of Ohio. I want to give credit to Travis and Gwen and the parents that were a part of GAPS. 8 years ago, we started conversations with parents about the students that fell into a gap. And they were talking a lot about dyslexic students. That was a very productive conversation that led to a lot of the changes that Travis was able to report on tonight. So again, when I talk about partnership, I mean it. It's parents sharing concerns, administrators teaching, teachers being responsive, and coming together and collaborating to say, hey, okay, what are the true needs of the students in our buildings? And I think our kids have benefited from it. So then when legislation like this comes along, and it's not ill intent. I mean, it's not an ill intent, it's just unfunded and, maybe myopically focused. So I think we're in a better position than most. So kudos to Travis and Gwen.
And our
teachers.
teachers.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Because a lot of the resources we have in place now, the need came through the parents, and so we went to the teachers and said, so what do we think is the most appropriate fit for this? And so a lot of resources that have made us very successful came from the work of our classroom teachers. Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks so much for coming. I'm not an expert in this area, so I learned a lot, of course. But more important was just, another great example of how the professionals in our buildings, our administrators and our teachers deal with our kids. We often don't have visibility to all the hard work that happens behind the scenes, right? We see our kids when we take them in, we see some projects they bring home, but there's so much behind that, right, that's really important. And it just makes me feel great to hear about these individual cases with students, teachers, and administrators and so forth. And I also really appreciate the comment there about continuous improvement mindset, right? That really is now pervasive in our culture, and that's so important because this is one that we've been working on for a while. What's the next one, right? What's the one that needs to become an issue at the state level or the national level? How do we get ahead of that? So thanks for your time and coming to teach us a little bit about this. I appreciate it. Very good. We've reached the time in our agenda where we welcome public comment. Anyone is welcome to step to the podium, state their name and address, and speak for no more than 5 minutes.
No, we gave, no.
Did we say 3
minutes?
3 minutes? No, 3 minutes.
You were nervous from the last time.
Start your time.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, thanks, James.
My name is Jim Prentice. I live at 211 Wicklow Drive in Granville, Ohio. I am a 1978 graduate of Granville High School. I ran track and cross country when I was in high school. Today, I'm coming back to you after I was with you last fall to talk about cross country. Now I'm talking about track. Okay, so I painted out, or Mr. Brown is going to get it out, the 4-page that I prepared for this. And the first page is pretty much what the advocate had to say about this monumental occasion where the Granville track team won the league meet. Second page includes a summary, and you'll see that Lee Bowman was first in the discus, first in the shot, first in the high hurdles, and second in the low hurdles. Jim Apollonia was first in the quarter. Jim Cooper was first in the half, with Tom Lyon right behind him. And Andy Woodring was the winner of the mile, and the mile relay team also came in first. At the bottom, from up until 1974, it was a 6-4-3-2-1 scoring system. We got a little bonus point for winning the event. In 1975, there was a change to a 10-8-6-4-2-1, And what I've done here is I've converted from the 6421 to the 10.86421 because in order to be consistent across years, I had to know what the score would be if everybody's doing the same 10.86421. So if you look at the back page, this gives you historical context of how big this was. Recall that in the fall, the cross-country team won the league. And now, in the spring, the track team won the league. And I went back until I finally found another team from Granville that had won the track title in the LCL. And that was 1948. Lyle King was on that team. Okay. This was also before consolidation. So you had Alexandria, you had Summit Station, you had a number of schools that now are, of course, are part of a larger Licking County League team. You had Etna, you had Hanover, Hartford, Hebron, Homer, Jacksontown, Kirkersville, Toboso, Patasko. So these were consolidated into larger schools. Now, my primary area of interest is 1963 through 1991 when the Licking County League came to an end. And I made a couple of notes that the Granville team did not, there was no team from 52 to 56. From 57 to 62, they competed in the Mid-Buckeye. But finally in 1963, they returned. Heath, for the very first time, competed in 1963. In 1963, they scored 4 points. 2 years later, they won. And then you will see that Heath was pretty much a very dominating force, not just in track, but also cross country. So for a Granville team to beat Heath during these years was a wonderful experience because Heath was the arch rival for Granville during the 70s. Now to give this a little bit more of a context within the school, page 3, paragraph 4. The Licking County League names champions in 7 interscholastic sports. Granville High School has already won 5 of those: basketball, cross country, football, golf, and track. There's currently a tie with Utica for first place in baseball. Each school with identical 6-1 records. Granville High School can, in any event, finish no worse than second and win the Diamond title too, or share it with Utica. So this is a Granville Sentinel editorial on May 12th. Where you're probably all wondering, okay, what happened? The baseball team won. In wrestling, Granville High School finished second. And it's difficult to see this as marring the record. So, 1971-72 school year, well, I'm speaking athletically, was an incredible year. They won everything. And, well, wrestling came in second, but you can't diminish that. I mean, and the fact that when it came to track and cross country, we had Heath. We had to beat Heath. And that was a hard thing to do. So you just see that in 1972, that group of seniors just were dominant in everything. And they were able to come away with that title. In 1971, all these guys were juniors, and they all came in second place. So it was kind of like, well, this is preordained. Next year, they're going to come back and probably win the whole thing. I guess my 3 minutes are up.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Jim, we always appreciate you coming and sharing the historical perspective.
One last thing.
All right.
Okay, 2 years from now, I'll be back because that'll be the 50-year anniversary of girls' athletics. There were no girls' athletics in 1971-72. There were no girls' athletics in 72-73. It was 73-74 when they first appeared. And that's one reason why when Betsy Gallagher was elected to the Granville High School Athletic Hall of Fame. The coach said, you're going to probably be the oldest woman, because she's class of 78, my class. She was one of the first women to have all 4 years within girls' athletics.
72 is a great year. I'm just saying, personally. It's a great year. Does me unfair.
Any other public comment? Anyone wish to take a take on?
Different person, she's not there, it's just a different 3 minutes.
I think it'd be really cool if we dug up those trophies from 1971, 72, and had them in one place at one time, so we could take lots of pictures.
Great idea. All right. Thank you, Josh.
All right, we'll task Mr. Duvall with that. All right, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those comments and things. We've moved on to the part of the agenda for general board discussion. There's one item that is going to probably continue to be on our agenda on a regular basis, which is the strategic growth that's happening relative to the Intel investment in our community and so forth. Jeff, do you want to?
Yeah, so let me share a few updates and just, kind of level set the board as far as what's been happening. So we have sent out about 32 invitations for strategic partners to participate in our Intel Task Force meeting on April 19th. That is going to be the initial meeting to talk a little bit about the scope of work of what that committee will be looking at. As we've stated before, we're going to be looking at projected enrollment, we're going to be looking at housing, we're going to be looking at financial information, and then facility needs. So that's really our scope. What you're finding and what's happening is the chamber has initiated their strategic task force. Their task is really looking at economic development. They've hired Jim Leonard, who is working on their behalf to kind of look at economic development. The week of April 25th, I've been invited as a part of the village and township process. They're going to be looking at zoning and strategic regional planning, looking at the comprehensive plan, all of those types of things. So all of these entities are working independently but overlapping. So many of us are on similar committees but looking at different aspects of the Intel project and strategic growth. So again, I've said this a couple of times, Intel is a major focus, but it's not the entire focus. We are experiencing growth now. And we have the River Road development that's been taking place already on the Harris property, so we are going to get more students. So it's just timely to have a broader strategic conversation about growth in Granville schools. But I wanted to report back that those things are starting to materialize. They're kind of layering on top of one another, but I think the focus is a little different for each entity in each task force. So I just wanted to share that information and ask if you have any questions.
Is Union Township?
Yes, Union Township trustee Sharps is participating.
Is he coordinating with the township village group at all?
I believe he is invited as well. I don't know the exact membership of that committee, but I do believe that it's comprehensive. Yeah.
Yeah, as I've talked to township trustees and village council and things like that, they've all been very proactive in reaching out to our surrounding communities in any way. Because we're not kind of overlapping, and so we're sharing information. Because there's not an abundance of information coming out of Intel and the state and things like that, so we're kind of making this up. And I think that collaboration is really key. In Granville, we are really very fortunate to have an incredibly powerful group of people that has a ton of experience in everything from, finance to real estate to growth and planning and things. So we have a 30-person member of our task force, right? And that's including people from surrounding communities, right, that are coming in to kind of learn what we're doing and kind of work together on this. So that's been really powerful, and I appreciate you putting that together. Last month we talked a little bit about how the board members on this board could participate in various committees, and I wonder if there was more thoughts on that. Like maybe there's, if there's a village committee that's working on that, one of us could be associated with that, with some of these other groups. And I know there's a lot of different efforts in finding ways for each of us to participate, within our capacity, and find connections there would be really valuable. So I don't know if you have more thoughts along those lines?
So once I meet with each group, I'll kind of get a better sense of who the membership is and if there's any opportunity for, you know, public observation of the meetings. I'm anticipating that they're all going to be publicly held. So I can get a better sense of each group. Obviously, our group, everybody wants to be a part of it, so we're going to have to strategically outline who's going to be at what meetings because we don't want to violate sunshine. So we'll have 2 people at each of our meetings, and we'll kind of work behind the scenes to collaborate on that and get people in the right positions. But once I know the membership, then we can focus on who's
Yeah,
going to be.
I think it would be nice to have us reporting back as well as Mr. Brown, because I've just seen that in other board meetings, other school board meetings, and it's nice to hear from not just Mr. Brown's perspective, but
And just be fair, Brittany is serving on the chamber. So it's for economic development.
So I was planning on coming to the 19th, the meeting on the 19th.
Yeah, we'll work to collaborate and find out who's all going to be there, and we'll make sure that we have representation on the next couple of meetings.
Okay.
Okay?
And the land management committee is having their meeting, our meeting on the 14th. So I can report back from that too.
Okay, excellent.
And, you know, there will be some significant meetings where more decisions are made, but we need to get really a closer pulse in survey and things like that. And I would be very open to having working sessions of the Board of Education that are public, so more than 2 of us could participate, right? And it's not, I would hope not that much more difficult logistically to organize it that way if there's a need to, once we figure out.
And I anticipate that when we get the information and the data from cooperative strategies, and that would be a good work session time with the entire group. So the board and the task force would probably work collaboratively then. But we would identify that as a work session and bring in the public for that.
Great.
Okay?
And any of the other many meetings that are happening
Sure.
with all the different organizations, if they are public meetings, we're all welcome to attend, right? And need to just be careful that we don't discuss school board items or try and make decisions in the process, but certainly listening to council meetings and township meetings and chamber meetings and things like that that are open sessions are really valuable now. So, very good. One other thing, I just saw, my kids are in San Francisco, and there's a big new advertising push in San Francisco with billboards all over. And the billboards are huge letters, and they say, Silicon Valley is for followers, Ohio is for leaders. Right? So like, all my kids' friends are asking, like, where's this Ohio place? I know where it's
yes.
Yeah, these
Actually,
billboards are
that's
showing up all over
Those
Silicon
are
Valley.
New York
Yeah.
pre-Intel. Those were New York a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
just funny because
Right. And there's a website associated with it, has some great, 30-second or 60-second commercials, which are teaching the people from the coast about Ohio. Right?
Is
And so
this
these people
an
that don't like know how to find parking, it's like,
campaign or
don't worry, you
not?
can find parking in Ohio. Like, no, really?
It's Jobs Ohio probably
Yes.
behind it,
Yes.
but it is in relationship to the broader push for Ohio and recruitment.
Right,
I don't think
right.
they're talking about the spring weather in Ohio.
Yeah. And my kids with friends in colleges and things like that around here, they're like, oh yeah, you're from Ohio, tell me about what it's like in Ohio and things like that, and I've heard back from kids at Purdue, I've heard back, that from kids at these other technical schools, they're like, I always thought I'd have to move to Silicon Valley in California, but maybe now there's something happening in Ohio. Right, so I think it's fantastic, right, and I think that the Granville schools are gonna navigate this very well, right? It's gonna be some soul searching by our whole community and things like that, and it's gonna be changes, but I know that we're gonna come out of it solid.
You started a trend. So I just, real quick, I just see this thread running through this meeting in terms of organization, and I really appreciate how organized our schools are, and now we have clear point people for different aspects of it. I saw it with Mr. Morris's presentation, and really appreciate it. Really makes me feel like things are moving forward smoothly.
You're welcome.
Any other general board discussion topics that came up as part of the presentations or anything else? Very good. Move on to the action.
Okay. Action agenda, action item 10.01 are the board policies that we did the first reading for in the last meeting. Again, almost all these are related to legislative or reference changes.
So moved.
Second.
No questions?
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Ade? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Okay, 10.02 is the renewal of the Global Scholarship Program for the annual fee of $7,500.
So moved.
Second.
Just a reminder that half of the cost is borne by the student who pays $50 for participation.
A fantastic
Great
program.
program.
It is. It's great that it's going to get back up and running here the last couple of years. So like so many things have stalled in some ways, but now if we can do our travel and our connections with our other organizations that sponsor this, that's going to be fantastic. So
Mr. Hopping is our point person for this program. He does a phenomenal job, so a shout out to him.
yeah, he invented it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And now it's what we do.
It is a partnership with the Columbus Council on World Affairs. I didn't mention that.
Yep.
Ms. Ade?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Okay, now to the addendum, kind of the exciting time of the night. 10.03, I recommend the appointment of Mr. Scott Hinton to the Granville High School principal position.
So moved. Second.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the process and the person, okay? So just to let everybody understand what our process is when we hire a person that is in a high-profile position like the high school principal, we do an open application process where we try and put feelers out to all the major conduits to administrative people. And we have a structured first-round interview based on that. Paper review, the structured interview is through Ventures, so it's a very structured process, and it kind of gives you a two-tier recommend, highly recommend. We tend to bring in people who are highly recommended to move forward in that process. Here specifically, the second round, and we had 2 of them with 7 candidates, we involve students, parents and community members, and staff and administration. We do that because we know in order to be successful, you have to have relationships with all those groups and partnerships with all those people. And what they do is they provide feedback on all of the candidates. Then we take that feedback, aggregate it, and say, okay, who do we want to bring in for the third round? Third round is where I browbeat someone for about 2 hours. And if they survive, maybe they get recommended. No, but it's called the fit interview. So it really is looking at the fit between the candidate and the organization. And we're looking for people who will add value, which brings me to the person. So, based on that process that I just articulated, I'm recommending Mr. Scott Hinton to you tonight. Just some highlights from the community session or from the second round interview. Words, that he's collaborative, energetic, a communicator, hardworking, leads by example, and he's a culture guy. So Mr. Hinton has been the principal of Amanda Clear Creek for 5 years. So he has been in the seat of being a principal, which is a little different than being in the seat as an assistant principal. He has been able to stretch the academic performance of Amanda Clear Creek in ways looking at offering different AP and CCP courses while still keeping in mind the whole child aspect, which is something that we value here in Granville Schools and our mission of learning for life and our portrait of a graduate. Relationships. Relationships were clearly communicated by his references to us, that he knows how to cultivate relationships in the best interest of students. And then as an instructional leader, one of the things that struck me about him is how he engaged the students in their interests. We've been talking a lot about student interests and passions, and one of the things that he's done in Amanda Clear Creek is looked at student interests and staff interests and found a marriage between the two in some interest-based electives, which I thought was an amazing opportunity for students to pursue things that they are passionate about. And we have a lot of take action projects and passion projects that we do here, but it was something that I thought was definitely in alignment with what we're doing here in Granville schools. So Mr. Hinton and his wife Lindsay have 3 daughters. Ellie is in 6th grade, Maggie is in 4th grade, and Daisy is going into kindergarten. So I am happy to recommend Mr. Scott Hinton to you. Any questions?
You forgot he attended the
I left that out.
Ohio University,
Yeah.
which is a real plus. For
He is a
Oh, you, oh, yeah.
Yeah. I did not mention.
I noticed that. Glaring oversight
Yes.
on your part.
I feel it now.
I'm just curious, is he ready to be a blue ace?
Yes.
As
So,
opposed to just an ace?
yes, the Amanda Clear Creek are the aces as well. He is going to be a blue ace now. He is. And he brought the attire to match. So.
My wife did not believe me that we were going from aces to blue aces. She did not believe me.
You just need to add blue, you don't have
I got
a whole lot of new swag.
I got
Any other questions?
Thanks all to the committee that was involved as well. I know it's a lot putting together these interviews and things like that, so thanks Tanya for making that all happen logistically, the amount of time associated with that and so forth. But it really sort of needs to be a process like that. And from what I've heard from talking with a couple of committee members and students as well, I talked to some of the students that got a chance to tour you around and meet you and so forth. I think we've made a fantastic decision, and welcome to Granville with the vote of you.
Ms. Dees? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Congratulations. So now that the formal announcement or the formal decision has been made, we will focus on creating an opportunity for the entire community to meet and greet Mr. Hinton at a future date. And we'll probably work with Maria to get something into the Advocate, kind of a little press release. So we'll be collaborating on that as well. So congratulations, I'm looking forward to great things from you, and welcome to the team.
Thank you. Very excited.
All right, that brings us to the consent agenda. Correct? Okay. 11.01A through D.
Second.
Okay, so, like that. Okay, thank you. Excellent. All right, a couple of things to call your attention to. As you know, we non-renew all supplementals. They are one-year contracts anyway, but we non-renew them all in this meeting, and then we hire back all the supplementals in future meetings. We have a couple of non-renewals for limited positions that were hired under the limited auspice for maternity leaves or other things. So we have a couple of non-renewals there. One thing that I will call your attention to is in group 2, we are hiring both a boys and a girls cross-country coach. In the past, we've had one head coach and 2 assistants that are a part of the breakup or breakdown of the teams, but we needed to have a separation there, which I think adds value to the opportunities that they have, and it increases coverage at certain events, so that's a good thing. We have a replacement for Mr. Paul Drake, who retired. Chris Ward, who is also a resident of Granville, is going to be our new physical education teacher. I told him he's got big capes to fill. If you know Mr. Drake, he always wore a cape, and during his High Five Fridays, so he's going to have to buy a cape. We have a couple of leaves of absences, and then under retirements and resignations, obviously we just commended the competition cheer group. Grace is resigning from that position, and then Bobby Seidel, who has been in our guidance counseling office for many, many years, is moving on to the Granville chapter of her life, and we wish her all the best in her retirement. Any questions?
Good to see field trip starting again too.
Getting back in the swing of things.
Fantastic.
Do we have to accept Bobby's retirement?
I think, yeah.
Okay.
Pretty excited.
All right.
Pretty excited.
I know she is.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Dees? Aye. Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Okay, item 12.01, approval of the March 2022 financial report.
So moved.
Second.
Any additional questions or comments on the financial report?
Thanks for that draft. That income draft was really useful. I think coming up with ways that we can visualize, our income and our expenses like that is going to be really helpful for myself to understand the finances as well as the rest of our community to kind of appreciate what we're trying to do there.
Yeah, I'm sorry I left you out when I was talking about organization. You're also extremely organized and keep things running smoothly too.
I really appreciate your clarity in a lot of your reports.
Okay, Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Dees? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Item 12.02, approval of the resolution to approve the return of fund advance. So moved. Second. So 3 years ago, before I was even here, you all approved an advance for the school store. And long story short, between COVID and staffing changes, it did not happen. But this is not to say that it can't happen in the future. We'll just handle it from an accounting standpoint, a cash standpoint, as opposed to going through this formal process. So we basically just need to shut the door on this resolution and handle it if it comes up next year or down the road. So. Ms. Dees? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
And item 12.03, approval of the permanent appropriation resolution.
Motion.
So moved.
Second.
Just one change in the bond retirement fund. Since we received our property tax settlement, the fees were a little bit higher than what we had originally budgeted. And within that fund, there's not much wiggle room to do budget transfers from other line items. So it's a very small increase of $2,000, but because we needed to increase that budget for those property tax collection fees, we have to approve the change in appropriations.
Thank you.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Okay, brings us to the end of the agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.